the functionality of Vault and Vault Professional. My name is Niall Smyth. I'm a Senior Technical Consultant with A2K Technologies. And to start off, what I'll do is just give you a little bit of information about who I am and my background. My background is in mechanical engineering and mechanical design, and I cover the mechanical design, simulation, and data management products for A2K Technologies. So today's agenda, what we'll look at first of all is a little bit about A2K Technologies. Then we'll talk about Vault, what it is, the terminology, the lingos, why you'd even think about using Vault, and the benefits it can give your design and workflow system. Then we'll move into using the software, and we'll look at a couple of specific topics that will add value to your system and show you how easy Vault is to use and integrate with. Then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, just type them into the question box on the bottom of the console on GoToMeeting, and we can go through them at the end. Okay, just a little bit about A2K Technologies. We're Autodesk's largest channel partner in Australia and New Zealand. We have a very large staff, which means we've got specialists on all the Autodesk products, which is a lot over the last few years. They keep launching lots and lots of products. But we've lots of people who have industry experience in dealing with those products. We're an Autodesk Platinum partner, which is the highest level of channel supplier you can get with Autodesk, which means we get the best access to training and knowledge and so on. So the types of products that A2K offer aren't just restricted to Autodesk products. We also offer full solutions in terms of Adobe, Microsoft, Global e-training as well is an excellent product. It allows you access to training for all the Autodesk products and Microsoft products, really good value for money, as well as things like design content where we create models for Revit and for use in the construction industry. So just moving into what is Vault. So some of the terminology or the lingo that you will hear is Vault Server and the Vault Client. So the difference between the two, the Vault Server, it sits on the server, obviously, and the client sits on the workstation. So all my design data is stored inside in the Vault Server. When I want to work on something, I'm at my workstation and I go through my CAD application, or I can go through the Vault Client, and it grabs a copy of the design data that I want to work on, takes it to my local workstation, and then I can work on it. Once I'm finished working on it, I can check it back in to the server, and that takes the copy off my local workstation. So that kind of methodology, what it means is you're not working across a network. So you're not slowed down to that speed of the network connection or the latency of the network. So it means you can work on data a lot faster. It also allows security, because when I've got design data checked out and I'm working on it and it's checked out to me, then everyone else is aware that I'm working on these files. So it prevents duplication of effort. Just a way to explain why you might want to have Vault. In the design process, there's a lot of stakeholders involved. So maybe procurement, purchasing, engineering, operations, sales. And what typically happens is a set of design documents or specification is created, or a request for quote from a customer. That's received and then it's distributed to the various parties in the organization. And then maybe procurement send out some more documents in response to this. And then perhaps they communicate with operations, and operations then are communicating to the quality department. And after a while, there is just a lot of data going from parties to parties, and there isn't any control over this data. There isn't one source of truth. So what Autodesk Vault can offer is the ability to control, access, and share But one of the most important things is that it gives you a central point for your design data, one kind of source of truth, if you will. And everyone knows that that's the current and latest revision. And even if we want to work with people outside of our organization, we can use the cloud, so integrate it with Vault using Buzzsaw, and that will allow external stakeholders or collaborators access to the data that we want to share. So it does offer a holistic data management solution. And when we move on, the reasons why you would look at Vault or data management in general. So perhaps you want to complete projects on time and on budget. So maybe projects are running late and overcost, and you want to have a repeatable design process in there. So having a repeatable design process gives you uniformity, but also you can shorten the design cycle by increasing the amount of design reuse that's going on. So instead of recreating designs from scratch, why not leverage the existing data you have and build on that? It also can provide an easy-to-manage process for release and revision of designs. So you make sure that there's no design data being released to the shop floor or to contractors before it's gone through the correct revision process. It also improves product quality through controlled collaboration. So you can make sure that a design isn't being sold while it's still a work in progress. You can make sure that maybe the sales guys don't need to see the designs that are work in progress. So through that controlled collaboration, you can increase the quality of your end product. So if you are thinking about, say, how that product data management or Vault can add value to your company, you could ask yourself a couple of questions. You could say maybe, are you recreating rather than reusing product designs? Are all the teams working on the same up-to-date design data? Does everyone know which revision is current? And is the design process running at the maximum efficiency? Or perhaps your design process isn't robust. Maybe there's changes coming in between the review and the approval stage, and you just want to get a bit more control over that. Ease of access to the data is a massive benefit when you use Vault. So you can save a huge amount of time looking for designs and finding the files that you really want using inbuilt search functionality in Vault. So compared to a traditional Windows folder structure where you can only really search via the file name, Autodesk Vault allows you to search via properties. So for example, if you're using AutoCAD, you could search using all the title blocks. You could search, if you're using inventor files, you could search via the iProperties. You could search via the author. You could search via the date released. So all of these things give you very quick access to your data, and it increases efficiency and reduces the amount of time spent on administration and searching and non-value add work. Another huge benefit of product data management in Autodesk Vault is the functionality to report on the data. So you've got this dashboard style report where you can generate reports and see very quickly what stage your design is at. So maybe you've got 100 parts or in your assembly or in a drawing, references and so on. You want to quickly see how many of these drawings are work in progress, how many more are to be released, how many are waiting to be released, just to give you a gauge or a barometer of how much the design stage is done. You can also quickly see who's got the files. So on a report you can say maybe the engineers have got 50% of the files checked out, the managers got 10%, so we need to get that 10% back and keep working on it. So it cuts down a lot of to and fro and paper trails. Another excellent feature of product data management is the ability to share. So the three main features are the ability to access, share, and use your data in different ways and collaborate with different parties. So even if you've got sites in different countries, or maybe it's just sites across one factory, using Vault Professional you can set up replication between all these locations. so that each team in each site is working off the current set of data. So again, it spares a lot of time trying to use VPN connections to get into the data. It spares a lot of emails going back and forth in terms of checking to make sure you've got the correct revision and everyone is on the same page. With multi-site replication and Windows Professional, or sorry, not Windows Professional, Autodesk Vault Professional, you can set up Windows authentication. So you can link to a group in Active Directory, and you can make it easy for everyone to log into their Vault. And you can also synchronize your passwords with your active domain in Windows using Windows authentication. And for sharing your data to non-design users, maybe you want to share to the entire business. If you use SharePoint, you can publish your bill of materials to SharePoint and then share that design data with everyone in the organization. So when we get into looking at the software, we'll see that you've got a secure check-in, check-out process. And each time you check a file in and check it out, it's like a snapshot or a version of that file is kept. So just a bit of terminology in terms of Autodesk Vault. They refer to that snapshot or the copy of a file as you check it in and check it out as a version. Okay? Then they refer to things as revisions once it changes state in a particular workflow. So for example, if it is work in progress, it gets released to the shop floor. Someone in the shop floor notices a mistake, send it back to work in progress. Well, then that would go to the next revision. So versions are created every time a file is checked in and out, and revisions are controlled via either the lifecycle state in the workflow or manually bumped up by the engineer and the designer. So an excellent feature of Autodesk Vault is its integration with the Microsoft Office products. So we'll see how to check in an Excel file. So you've got a tab that gives you access to Vault. So this means all your project data can be added into the Vault, and any file type can be added in. But there is a Vault tab on the Microsoft Office products, which allows you to check in, open from the Vault, search through the Vault, and check the files out you want. So you've got all your project documentation in one place. In order to organize and control the way your data is sorted in the Vault, it uses a thing called categories. And categories is simply just a way of categorizing or putting your data into certain buckets or folders. So, for example, you can have a category for documentation, for engineering, for marketing, projects, and so on. And you can tell Vault which category you want a document to sit in. And that category can be based on a file extension, a file name, an author, a basic condition. So moving on to maybe lifecycle control. So if you want to talk about lifecycle control, we can set different states in the lifecycle process. And these states can be work in progress, for review, released, obsolete, and a quick change. And all these different states can be customized, or they can be fully redefined. So maybe you want to put in 5 more states in your workflow, or a different workflow entirely. So it's fully customizable. And at each state and each transition, for example, we'll look at this Office Data Lifecycle definition. We can tell Vault what maybe criteria to have in there. So transition from work in progress to released, we can tell Vault, unless the author is filled in, don't allow that transition. Or perhaps if the wrong revision scheme has been used, then again we can tell Vault prevent that transition from happening. At each state, we can then tell Vault, again, who's allowed to read, modify, or delete at different states in the lifecycle. So for example, at the work in progress, we can see here that the administrators have a read, modify, and delete capability at this stage. So if a Word document is in work in progress, administrators can read, modify, and delete, whereas if we look at purchasing, purchasing just have read and modify access. In terms of who can transition from work in progress to release, we've got security restrictions up here, and everyone is allowed to do it. Okay, so we could restrict that and just say managers are the only ones that are allowed to transition a file from work in progress to released. So as you can see here, you can customize each individual state in terms of who can see a document at the state and also who can transition a document or a file from one state to the next. And what people typically do is, you can see we've got a quick change up here. So typically if a document goes from released and it's bumped back to work in progress, then perhaps they'd automatically bump to primary revision. And we can see that just here, actions bump primary revision. So that's a way of telling it. A Vault basically says, okay, as soon as the file goes from release back to work in progress, it's going to go from revision 1 to 2. But perhaps we just see there's some annotations, some slight changes, some small changes. But then we can have a quick change here, where we can float into the quick change state, people can modify it, and then put it back into the released state again. And that doesn't bump up the revision. So that'll be a typical life cycle that people would use in Vault. Another excellent feature of product data management in Autodesk Vault is the ability to track changes. So there's a thing called engineering change orders inside an Autodesk Vault Professional, and it allows you to track the who, why, when, and where changes have been made. So perhaps you've gone from revision 2 to revision 4, and you want to track why it went from revision 2 to 3 and why it went from revision 3 to 4. Using engineering change orders, it gives you the capability to electronically track and have an electronic paper trail of those changes. So it does away with a lot of manual paperwork, but it still documents the need for the change and also the reasons for it and so on, and who approved it. So we'll cover more about engineering change orders in the second part of this webcast series. Just to summarize what we've covered so far, is Vault can manage the entire engineering process. It can also integrate across the entire business. It allows you to quickly reuse design data. And it documents and stores your design decisions as well. So it gives you control over your life cycle, and that way it can increase the efficiency. So there's no way you don't know what state a file is in if you're using life cycles, and also who's got control over it or who's got access to it. So let's switch over to use Vault. And we'll see here that in my Vault, what I've got set up is different folder structures, and it's all under the Designs folder. So if it's your first time seeing the Vault client, it's a nice layout. It's laid out pretty much like Microsoft Outlook or emails. So it's quite easy to use. It's very easy to get trained up on. And you'll see here that I've defined different folder categories. And they're defined using different colors, which is quite nice. And if I wanted to add new folders, what I've done here today is just added a new folder called Webcast Examples. And we'll use that today to just put files in, check them out, check them in, check them out, and so on. To create new folders, all you do is right-click and select New Folder. And then you can tell Vault what category you want it to be in. So I've created a new engineering folder, called it Webcast Examples, and it's empty at the moment. So one of the best things I said earlier on about Autodesk Vault is its ability to search through large amounts of design data. So you can see there I've got lots of folders, huge amount of data. It's probably small compared to most design teams. So what I can do is, let's say I'm looking for particular data. I can click on the Find button up here in the top right, and that gives me a basic or an advanced search. So let's say I'm searching for files that are related to a particular project. I can search via all these properties in Vault. So as I mentioned earlier, in Windows structure, you can search probably by the file name, file type, and that's it. Here you've got a huge amount of properties you can search on. So for example, let's say I'm going for project number. And I know this project number that I'm looking for contains the words ACAD1. So I want to find all the files related to ACAD1. So I'd click on Add. That adds the query that I've created, which is project number contains ACAD1, and I can click Find Now. And it returns all the files that contain ACAD1. And that project number, that's actually a title block attribute in a 2D drawing. So what I've done is I've mapped the properties from my title block into Vault, and now Vault can search in all those title blocks. So very quickly I can find the data I'm looking for. And another really nice feature of the search capabilities here, as I mentioned earlier, is to create a visual report on the data. So out of the box, Vault Professional gives you a whole lot of report templates that you can work with. So for example, I want to create a report on file by lifecycle state. So on this project, I want to see what state is my project at. And from this, you can see a very visual representation of how many files are at the work in progress state, how many are at the for review, and how many are at the release state, and what category they're at. So they're basically assigned to engineering, all in work in progress, work for review and release. And when we scroll down, it tells me who's got the file, or the state of the file, and the comments that's associated to it. So I can see these ones are released to manufacturing, the checked in date, that were last checked in, who checked them in, who was the last person to work on it, and so on. So there's a second way of creating reports from the Vault client. So I just close the search option at the moment. And when you're at the folder level, and when I go to the folder that contains, say, the files I want to create a report on, I can click on Configure here. And let's say, again, picking a different template, maybe just the file detail. And click Open and OK. And that generates a different report for me on the details of each of the files in this folder. So we can see that on these files, it's revision 1, who it's checked in by, comments, and so on. It gives me a little preview. So you've got a lot of different search capabilities and reporting functionalities within the Vault client. So that's one of the, as I mentioned, one of the best features of Autodesk Vault. Another feature, again, and these kind of features that I'm showing, I guess, they're applicable to everyone from the one-man band, so a guy working on his own in the engineering department, to the entire organization. So I've used Autodesk Vault just working on my own on different projects, and it adds a huge amount of value because I can quickly edit properties that I want. I can quickly copy designs, and I can quickly rename designs. So for example, if I go to the folder that contains those AutoCAD files, and maybe someone has asked me that I need to change the properties on this many files, and I don't want to have to open each one individually and modify it, because that's going to take me a long time. Okay, so what I can do is I can go up here to Edit and Edit Properties, or on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got a Properties Edit option, which is over here, little pencil symbol, and we can click on Edit. And from this screen, we can call up what properties we want to edit. So perhaps we want to change something like the project number. What we can do is, or maybe the author. So maybe the author, we need to change this to JMC, just for example. That's the author. But what I can do is then I've got Excel functionality almost. And I can drag and drop, and I can change all the properties that I want. Or I could copy from Excel and right-click paste in. A very quick way of putting in new part numbers or change the project number. And if I change these project numbers, what it'll do is it'll write that property back to my title block in AutoCAD in this case. And it spares me a lot of time because I don't have to open up 6 different files and change the things I want. One hit I can do it, click OK, and it starts editing the properties for those 6 or 7 files. So as I said, from even just a single operator point of view, I'd recommend using Vault for the functionality that it gives you to edit properties, part numbers, and also to reuse designs. So there's an excellent functionality in here called copy design. So if I go to my demonstrations folder and I look at an iLogic assembly, and let's say I want to reuse this particular assembly. So when I go to the assembly on the bottom half of the screen, we can see where the parts are in that assembly. So where used, what parts are in there. Also gives me previews and views of the different versions. So each time it was checked in and checked out, it created a new version. I can see the revision scheme changed. So maybe you want a revision scheme for prototypes and a different revision scheme for release data. You can manage that in Vault as well. So the preview as well is quite good. So if you want to give a look at something, you can click on it and we can update that preview. It will generate a visualization file for us. But let's say the scenario is while we're waiting for that to create. Let's say we want to create a very similar railing, and it's a Mark II. Okay, so slightly different, but we want to leverage the data we already have. So using the copy design, we can do that. I'll just wait for this visualization file to finish creating, just to show you what the visualization file looks like. And you can see there that you've got a nice 3D representation of your visualization file. And you can set it such that that visualization file is created as soon as you check it into Vault, and that way then you don't have to go updating like I did just there. Okay, so let's say we want to, we'll just work with the assembly, the railing demo. Okay, now we'll right click and we'll say copy design. What it does is it looks at all the children of that assembly, so all the components that make up that assembly, and it's going to reuse, it's going to copy a new assembly and reuse the existing parts. So let's say if I don't want to reuse the existing parts, I want to create a new copy, I can just create a new copy, or I can select the ones that I want to copy. So you've got great control over pick and click. I can tell it put in a suffix by default, and we'll call it underscore M2. Click apply, and we can see there that it's going to give it a new name, so railing demo underscore M2, and all the way down. I can then tell it what folder I want to put it into. So I can, it shows me my Vault folder structure, and I want to put it into my webcast examples, which is empty as we saw earlier on. Click OK, and OK again. And because it's an iLogic assembly, it's given me the option to remove the rules. So here's another good advantage using Vault, especially if you're using Inventor and iLogic, because you can create another variant and take the rules out of it. So let's click OK. And what it does is it copies all those files. And let's give a look down at our webcast examples, and we'll see that it's created a copy with underscore Mark II for that assembly. And when I open that assembly, all the links will remain intact. So it gives you very fast capability of copying linked files, because basically Vault understands the links that exist between assembly files and design files, so it will copy the children. So it's excellent capability there for leveraging existing design data. So the next thing I want to look at is, let's look at the basic check-in and check-out process, and we'll use Inventor. We could use AutoCAD, we could use Excel, and we'll use Excel in a little bit as well. So let's switch over to Inventor. And just create a very, very simple part. So I'm not going to spend time modeling anything in particular. Just going to put in a box, put it on this work plane, extrude it out, and there's my part. So from my CAD application, you can see here that if I did want to open different parts, I've got access directly into my Vault and all my folder structure. So in my day-to-day work, I mightn't necessarily need to go to the Vault client. I can do everything pretty much that I need to do from this tab in here. So let's say I'm checking it in for the first time, and I can check it into webcast examples. I'll call it Cube. and save it. And when this dialog box appears for your check-in, you've got options. It says you can keep the files checked out, or I can close the files and delete the working copy. So what that allows me to do is, if I want to just save an update, I can click on Keep the Files Checked Out, and it'll keep the file in control. I've got access to control it. Or I can close the file and delete the working copy. What that means is it'll delete the copy off my workstation and put it into the Vault. So inside in Vault, when we flick back again, and we refresh our view, we can see that our cube part has come in here. But what I want you to pay attention to is this little icon here. It's been assigned the engineering category, and it's been assigned the lifecycle state and a revision scheme. Okay? So what I want to do is I'll show you how that happened. So first step is to create a category. And as I said earlier on, categories are ways of organizing the data. So when we go to behaviors, let's click on the categories button, and we'll create a new file category. And this category I'm going to work on is for my office documents. So let's say I want to keep my specification documents inside my Vault. I'll just put in office docs as a description. Click OK. And when I create a category, what I can do then is I can tell Vault that everything that gets put into this category, I want to give it a particular life cycle. So let's say assign a life cycle, and I can pick from existing ones. Or if I click on Edit, I can create a new life cycle from scratch. So let's say I'm creating a new life cycle. First state in my life cycle is going to be work in progress, so WIP. Applies to office documents, files, the file category. First state, okay, so my first state is going to be work in progress. Click OK. And I'll go up and just change this definition name to office documents. My next lifecycle state is going to be released. Click OK. Now what I can do then is I can control what happens between these two states. So for example, at the work in progress state, I can edit who's allowed to transition it from work in progress to released. Okay, so I'll just office documents, specifications. So I will click edit that. What I can do is I can control the security, who can transition a document from the work in progress to the actual release state. I can put in criteria. So let's say I could put in that the author is not empty. So someone has to fill in the author of the author property in the document before they can transition that document. Maybe I want to put in some actions. So maybe bump primary revision. So typically this is done on the back cycle when it's gone from release back to work in progress. I can tell it to automatically bump the cycle or bump the revision. I can add security. So maybe I only want certain people. So maybe I only want John to transition this document. Okay? But for the example, just to keep it simple, I'm going to allow no restrictions on it and leave everything just at the default. I can do the same thing for the backwards transition. Exact same thing, criteria, action, security. If I want to control who can see the document as work in progress, I can add. So maybe I just want guests to be only access to read that. I don't want them to modify or delete any documents. So I can add control and security levels to the state of the document. But again, what I'll do is just to keep it simple, I'll remove state-based security for this example. On the control side of things, we can look at when our administrator wants to tidy up the vault, when they want to maybe reduce the database size. The administrator can purge the vault. So what that means is, at different points in time, you might want to tidy up the vault. So we can tell Vault delete all the versions. So that's when we check in and check out a file. That's basically the snapshot that it takes each time it checks in and checks out. And we can tell us delete everything except the first and last version. So maybe I want to see where the design started. And then maybe I want to see where the design finished, but I'm not really concerned about all the transitionary ones. Or you can say, I don't want to delete any. I want to keep all the documents in this life cycle. We can also put in standard comments here. So maybe this document is in the work in progress state. Only certain people can edit. So when I click OK to that and close again, what we'll see that is this life cycle has been assigned to the Office Documents category. So when I click Assign, I can say, yes, I want that to be the default life cycle. So by default, I want it to go to the Office Document Specification life cycle, as opposed to none. Next thing I can look at is revisions. So again, I could create a new revision scheme from scratch here. I could copy an existing one and define how it transition from primary, so A, B, C, D, to secondary and tertiary revisions. I can dictate whether it's alphabetic, numeric, and so on, or the comments that go in there. Okay, so just for make life easy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Assign instead of creating a new one. And I'm just going to assign the standard numeric format, or let's go alphabetic. Okay, I'll add it in there, and I'll double click on it to make it the default revision scheme. So the standard numeric format is out of the box. So this category now has got a life cycle assigned to it, Office Document Specifications. We look at the revision. It's got a standard alphabetical format assigned to it, so looking good. So we click Close and Close again. And let's jump into Excel and create a document in Excel. So when we go into Excel, I'm just going to type in some bit of text, specifications. And on my Vault tab, up here in the top of the screen, Autodesk Vault, let's log in. Log in as my administrator, punch in my password. And now I'm in the Vault. And again, the same thing applies here. I can access all the documents within my Vault from my Excel document. So quite good integration with Microsoft Office products. So let's say check in. Oh, one little thing I forgot to create before we check it in is when I go back into Vault. Let's go back to our Vault settings, and I need to assign a rule. So I need to tell Vault that for this particular file, so I'm going to call it Office Control Rule, Excel, and it's assigned to Office Documents. And I'm going to tell Vault that if the file extension contains XLS, then it's going to get assigned to the Office Documents category. And if it gets assigned to the Office Documents category, well, then it's going to get automatically assigned to the life cycle we created and automatically assigned a revision scheme. So that's quite good. So I have to make sure that that rule is applied. So I'll click OK. Go back to Excel. I'm going to save the document, and I'm going to put it into my workspace, my Vault workspace on the computer, and put it into my webcast examples. So I'll give it a name, specification 1, fine. Click Save, and then I'll check it in. And again, we've got the same dialog box. I can close the files and delete a working copy. Gives me a warning saying it's going to be deleted off my workstation, and it gets put in. So that's a very brief introduction into categories, life cycles, revisions. We also saw things like copy design, editing properties. And another very useful functionality in here is if I want to rename a whole lot of files in one go. It allows me to rename them. So let's say next again. And then I could even call up an automated numbering scheme if I wanted here. Or I could just manually change the name. So again, it spares you that kind of administration, time spent changing documents' names, making sure links are retained. Vault understands the links in the CAD design data, so it cuts down a lot of time. So let's jump back to the PowerPoint presentation for a second. And we can see here that the items we covered. We looked at access control. So you saw me log into Vault using Excel. So I logged in using my password and my administrator username. You saw version control. So that's basically when we're back in Vault. If I look at a document, we go to history. We can say that this is its first version, but we look back up at the original document, which is up here. We go to versions. We can see all the different versions here. And we can easily roll back. If I want to roll back to the design as it was on the 2nd of December 2014. So, okay, maybe my date. Maybe my date convention might be wrong. And that's the 12th of February. Excuse me. So back to the day. So if we want to roll back to the 31st of May 2012, we can quickly do that. So that gives us great control over our ability to control what version of design is at and how the design is progressing. So we also saw things like copy design. So a very quick way of copying design files that contain links, renaming them, and then working on that design again completely separate from the first one. We looked at revisions, lifecycles, and the property editor. So you can edit properties really quickly and easily. And also the search and report functionality. So the search and report functionality, as I said, it's one of the best features of Vault because it allows you to find data really quickly. If you think about how long you spend looking for files and people structure projects differently, and if you haven't got that control happening, then it can waste a lot of time. So, excuse me. To cover the stuff we'll cover in the second part of this webinar series, we'll look a little bit more about setting up users and groups, assigning permissions to groups. So maybe you want people only read-only access. Maybe they're your draftees or your purchasing department. Whereas you want your designers to have read-modify, and maybe you only want to give delete access to your administrators. We'll also look at creating labels. And labels are for creating a snapshot of a folder, pretty much. So if you think about a project process, maybe you're at the initial design phase to go to final design phase. So you want to create a snapshot of what the customer signed off on at the initial design phase. You can then say, right, create a label, this point in time, everything in this folder takes a snapshot. If you want to roll back later on in the project to that initial phase, you can roll back. That's a very powerful tool as well as the automatic file naming. So maybe you want to adopt certain file naming for your electric components, mechanical components, purchase components. You can enforce that through Vault as well. We spoke a little bit about change order management. That allows you to control the who, why, when, where of changes and what's the reason for it, who approved it, and gives you that electronic document paper trail. We'll also look at bill of materials a little bit and how if you want to integrate your bill of materials to, say, SharePoint or ERP or MRP systems. We'll talk about that in the next webinar also. One thing just before we move on to the questions and answers is I want to mention the A2K Technologies Virtual Summit. So that is an event we're hosting. We're working on it at the moment. That's on the 20th of February in 2014 from 10 o'clock till 4 o'clock. If you go onto our website and you look at the events tab, you can find out more information about that. Or just type in A2K Technologies Virtual Summit into Google and you'll find the website for the event. So I encourage you to check that out. I'll be presenting on some simulation products from Autodesk, and there's lots of other interesting presentations that are worth tuning in for. Okay, so what I want to do is, okay, so that doesn't seem like it's working on my GoToMeeting at the moment, so we'll skip on to the next one. No. Okay, we'll go straight to the questions and answers. Okay. So just looking down through the questions, we got a couple of them coming in. So one of the questions is in the printing capability directly from Vault. Does Vault have the ability to take snapshots of documents on a daily process? Say a project leader wants to review the status of drawings at the close of business each day. Yep, so to answer that, let's go into our Vault. And for example, you want to, let's give a look at our find capabilities. Let's say we want to check on the files that are checked out on a certain date. So let's say files checked out in the last week. Okay? And we'll add that as a search, and we'll click on Find Now. So we can see all the files that have been checked out in the last week. So what we can do is we can save this search, and we can call it Files Checked Out in the Last Week. Click OK. And what that does is, over here on the left-hand side, we've got a saved search folder called Files Checked Out in the Last Week. And then I can click on that, Files Checked Out in the Last Week, and I could run a report on it if I wanted. So just like we saw earlier on, you could see on all these drawings which file state is at, who's got it checked out, what's the current status. In terms of plotting capability, again, it's very good plotting capability. So let's say we've got all these AutoCAD drawings up here, and we want to plot. So we go up to the file, and we click on Plot. And it processes all those files. So we've got batch printing capability in here. And you can integrate the plotting capability with the lifecycles changes as well, with a third-party product called Cool Orange, for example. If you wanted to publish the file to PDF, when a file changes from maybe work in progress to released or for review, you can have it automatically create a PDF. So it's just working through the different files that it's plotting there. So you can see then we can plot numbers of copies, a number of files in batch process. So it's quite good. And we can close that off. And I don't want to save. So going back to our questions, let's just give a look again. And we have another one or two questions to go through. So it's just taking us over time a little bit, but that's okay. So let's just give a look at these. We've a question coming in from, so that's the printing one. Can property fields be inserted in Excel and Word documents, which could be accessed by Vault? So what you can do with the files is you can attach properties to the files in Vault. So for example, if you've got an author property with Word, you can then edit that in the Vault, and you can write it from the Vault. What you'd have to do then is create a link between the actual Word document in the Word document to the property if you wanted to integrate it further. So yes, you can add in user-defined properties from Excel and Word documents. Next question is, integration with Office now include 64-bit. So 2014, the Vault client changed up to 64-bit, so it gave us much faster integration. So the computer I'm running on at the moment is 64-bit. So I guess the answer to that is yes, I've worked with Excel and checked the file in and out, and it's reading the properties and so on. Next question on there is, how important is it to use the Vault within the application to keep association and links between files? So it's, in terms of CAD data, like Inventor, for example, we have lots and lots of links. When you've got lots of links between the CAD data, then it's very important to use the CAD application to check it in. Because if someone just drag and drops, say, for example, an assembly file into Vault using just Windows folder structure and just drags and drops it in, then it'll just bring the assembly file. It won't bring the children, and it'll lose those links. So when using CAD data with links, it's very important to use the CAD application. If you're confident that you understand the relationships within the folders, then you can just right-click and add files and folders by either dragging or dropping, or right-clicking on the Designs folder, and you have the option then to add a folder. But you do have to just turn off the option to disable checking of design files. So there's an option there to prevent people drag and dropping design files into Vault. So once that's turned off, you can then drag and drop folders in. Okay, so next one is how to convert existing standalone projects to Vault. So what you do is, for that scenario, you put one master project, and that sits on the top of your projects directory. And then you can just remove the existing projects, and you make sure that things like your content center are all collated into one folder. So it takes a little bit of work, but it depends really how those standalone projects are set up. It can be a case of just putting in a project file at the top level and deleting the other project files, because a project folder or file just basically points Inventor to the correct directory. And it tells it what content center to use, what templates to use. So it really depends on what your folder structure is set up like. And what I would recommend is probably contacting us here at A2K Technologies, and we can give a look. And we'll do a Vault scoping and say, okay, this is where you are, and this is where you want to go, and this is what you need to do. Okay, so the next question is automatic printing to PDF. Is this only for AutoCAD files or also for Excel and Word? That's quite a good question. I'd have to give it a try and see. I don't have too many Excel and Word files in there. So what I'll do is I'll just shelve that question for the time being, and I'll get your contact details and respond to you exactly on the capabilities of batch printing Excel and Word. Okay. Some people have said they've lost the ability to see the screen that I was demonstrating. Okay, so I hope that didn't happen too long ago. But basically what I did was, for the question, there is a batch print utility. So I just go up to the File tab on Vault, and there's a plot functionality, and you can select the files you want to plot, and then it picks up all those files, and you've got the option to put in how many copies of the file you want created. So it's pretty straightforward, really. So where to get help about setting up Vault? So I think I've answered that question. If you contact us here at A2K, we can arrange a Vault scoping meeting, and we'll assess what your current state is in terms of hardware, in terms of your files, and let you know what the minimum requirements are to get set up. Okay, so that's probably your quickest way of finding information and getting a kind of a roadmap ahead of you to switch from single user projects into Vault. So integration with SharePoint. So again, what we'll do is we'll cover the SharePoint integration a little bit better in the second part of this webcast, because that's basically why we split this webcast into two parts. We said we'd look at the basic stuff now, and then look at the more advanced stuff in the next webcast. So yeah, so another question is about the Excel and Word properties. So again, can it be used actually in the document, say a specific cell in Excel? So what you do is you'd have to, I'm not sure about Excel, how you'd actually map a file property into a cell. So that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to create a link between the file property and the actual data you put into a certain cell. Once that link is established, then you could link the file property into Vault. So theoretically you could do it, but I'm not good enough at Excel to define how you link a cell in Excel to a file property. But once you could do that, then you could potentially do it. So that I think wraps up the questions that we've got in today. So thank you very much for your time, guys. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to tune into this webcast. And as I said, we'll hopefully see you again at the virtual summit. We tend to run these webcasts once a month, twice a month, depending on what's going on. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time.